Please don't hurt us. 7-year-old Kira's voice cracked as she pressed herself against her mother's legs, her small fingers clutching the worn fabric of Lena's work uniform. The man towering over them, Frank Brussels, their landlord, had fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white, and something in his bloodshot eyes made Kira's stomach twist with terror. 3 months, Frank snarled, spittle flying from his lips as he jabbed a finger at Lena's face. 3 months of excuses, 3 months of promises, and I'm done being nice. Lena's hands shook as she positioned herself between her daughter and the enraged man. At 28, she looked older, exhaustion carved into the lines around her eyes, her once bright spirit dimmed by months of 16-hour workdays that still weren't enough to keep them afloat. Frank, please. I get paid tomorrow from the diner, and Mrs. Patterson said she might have extra cleaning work this weekend. Shut up. Frank's voice exploded through their tiny apartment, and Kira flinched so hard she nearly fell. Do you think I'm running a charity? Do you think I care about your sob story? Through the thin walls, Kira could hear neighbors moving around, pretending not to notice the shouting that had become a weekly occurrence. Nobody helped anymore. Nobody wanted to get involved with the crazy landlord who owned half the building and had connections that made people nervous. Daddy, Kira whispered to herself, so quietly that even her mother couldn't hear. Daddy, please come home. But Daddy had been gone for 3 years. Ever since the night when angry words had filled their old house, the big house with the swimming pool and the playroom full of toys that Kira still dreamed about sometimes. Ever since Mommy had told Daddy to leave and never come back, and Daddy had said things that made Mommy cry for weeks. You know what? Frank stepped closer, close enough that Kira could smell the alcohol on his breath. I think you need a reminder about what happens to people who don't pay their bills. He grabbed a framed photograph from their small table, the only picture they still had of better times, showing Lena and Kira at the beach last summer when they'd still been able to afford small luxuries. Frank raised it above his head, ready to smash it against the wall. No! Kira broke free from her mother's protective grip and threw herself forward, her tiny hands reaching for the photograph that contained her last memory of happiness. Frank's other hand shot out, shoving the 7-year-old backward with enough force to send her stumbling. She hit the corner of their second-hand coffee table, and pain exploded through her shoulder as she crumpled to the floor. Kira! Lena screamed, dropping to her knees beside her daughter. Maybe next time you'll remember that I'm not playing games, Frank sneered, still holding the photograph like a weapon. You have until tomorrow night to come up with $1,800, or you're both on the street. And if I have to come back here again. He let the threat hang in the air, his eyes traveling over their small apartment with predatory calculation. Then his gaze settled on Kira, who was clutching her injured shoulder while tears streamed down her face. Actually, Frank said, his voice dropping to something that sounded almost casual, maybe there's another way you can work off the debt. Your daughter's getting old enough to be useful. I know people who. The front door exploded inward. Touch my family again, and you'll regret it. The voice hit the room like thunder, deep and commanding and filled with a fury that made even Frank Brussels step backward. In the doorway stood a man Kira recognized from photographs and dreams, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than their monthly rent. Ellis Cross, her father, looking like an avenging angel with storm clouds in his eyes. Ellis! Lena's voice came out as barely a whisper, confusion and hope and fear all tangled together. Daddy! Kira struggled to her feet despite the pain in her shoulder, her heart exploding with joy and relief. Daddy, you came back. But Ellis's attention was focused entirely on Frank, who was backing toward the wall like a cornered animal. In 3 years, Ellis had built Cross Technologies into a company worth $800 million. He'd negotiated with Fortune 500 CEOs, faced down hostile takeovers, and commanded boardrooms across 3 continents. But none of that mattered as much as the rage coursing through him at the sight of his daughter's tears. Who the hell are you? Frank tried to bluster, puffing out his chest despite the obvious fear in his eyes. I'm the man who's about to teach you what happens when you threaten children, Ellis said quietly. His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow that made it more terrifying than if he'd been shouting. Look, buddy, this is between me and the tenant. You need to. Ellis moved with surprising speed for a man in a $1,000 suit. One moment he was standing in the doorway, the next, he had Frank pressed against the wall with one hand while pulling out his phone with the other. Mike, it's Ellis. I need you to run a complete background check on someone named Frank Brussels, landlord, probably mid-40s, works out of the Riverside district. Ellis's voice remained conversational even as Frank struggled uselessly against his grip. I want to know every debt, every violation, every parking ticket. And Mike, I want it in the next 5 minutes. Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. Some stories are too close to my heart to share on YouTube. I send those, along with little life lessons and surprises, to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, you can join with the link in the description. You can't just, Frank started. Can't what? Can't protect my daughter from a man who just threatened her? Can't use my resources to investigate someone who's clearly running some kind of illegal operation? Ellis's grip tightened slightly. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Frank's phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. And again. That's interesting, Ellis said, glancing at Frank's pocket. Sounds like someone's trying to reach you urgently. I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that my security team just flagged your building for multiple safety violations that should have been reported to the city months ago. How did you? Money talks, Frank. And I have a lot of money. Ellis released him but didn't step back, keeping the landlord pinned with nothing but the force of his presence. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my family alone. Forever. You're going to forgive every penny they owe you, and you're going to find them a new place to live. Somewhere safe, somewhere clean, somewhere my daughter can grow up without being terrorized by small men with big egos. I'm not doing anything for you people, Frank spat, trying to regain some semblance of authority. You think your money scares me? I've got connections too. People who don't like rich boys throwing their weight around. Ellis smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Mike just sent me your file, he said, glancing at his phone. Frank Brussels, age 47, 3 arrests for assault, 2 restraining orders filed by former tenants, currently under investigation by the IRS for tax evasion. Oh, and this is interesting. You're behind on payments to some very dangerous people. Frank's face went pale. It seems you owe Tony Castellano's organization about $50,000 in gambling debts. That's unfortunate, Frank. Tony doesn't like it when people can't pay their bills. How do you know about? Because Tony Castellano is a client of mine, Ellis said simply. I handle cybersecurity for several of his legitimate businesses. And he's been looking for you. Frank's bravado crumbled completely. Look, I didn't know she was we can work something out. The only thing we're working out is your exit from our lives, Ellis said. You have exactly 60 seconds to get out of this building before I make some phone calls that will change your life permanently. Frank scrambled toward the door, but paused to throw one last desperate threat over his shoulder. This isn't over. You can't protect them forever. When you leave again. I'm not leaving again. The words hung in the air like a promise and a vow. Ellis turned away from Frank to look at his daughter, really look at her for the first time in 3 years. Kira had grown taller, her face had lost some of its baby roundness, and there was a wariness in her eyes that hadn't been there when she was 4. But she was still his little girl, still the most important thing in his world. Daddy, she whispered, taking a tentative step toward him. Are you really staying? Before he could answer, Lena's voice cut through the moment like a blade. Get out. Ellis's head snapped toward her, confusion replacing the fury that had driven him since he'd heard his daughter's cries from the hallway. Lena, get out of our home, Ellis. Right now. Mommy, no. Kira ran to her mother, grabbing her hand desperately. Daddy saved us. Daddy made the bad man go away. And now Daddy can leave the same way he did 3 years ago, Lena said, her voice shaking with emotions that Ellis couldn't read. We don't need you. We don't want you here. Lena, please. Let me explain. Explain what? How you've been living like a king while your daughter and I survived on food stamps. How you never once called or texted or sent a single dollar to help us. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice remained steady. You want to be the hero who shows up at exactly the right moment. But where were you yesterday? Where were you last month when I was working 20 hours a day just to keep us from being homeless? Ellis felt something crack inside his chest. I tried to help. I sent checks. You sent checks to a P.O. box that I closed when we moved out of the house. You never tried to find us. You never tried to contact us directly. You just salved your conscience by throwing money at a problem and walking away. That's not what happened. Then what did happen, Ellis? Because from where I'm standing, you abandoned your family and only came back when it was convenient for you. Kira looked back and forth between her parents, confusion and fear replacing the joy she'd felt at seeing her father. "Mommy, why are you yelling at Daddy? He saved us." "Because sometimes, baby, people hurt us even when they're trying to help." Ellis stared at the woman he'd once loved more than life itself, seeing the exhaustion and pain carved into every line of her face. 3 years ago, their marriage had exploded in a storm of accusations and misunderstandings that neither of them had been mature enough to weather. He'd left because she'd told him to leave. He'd stayed away because she'd made it clear she never wanted to see him again. But looking at them now, at Kira's confusion and Lena's devastation, he realized that maybe there had been more to the story than he'd understood. "Lena," he said quietly, "I know you hate me. I know I failed you both. But please don't make our daughter pay the price for our mistakes. Our daughter has been paying the price for 3 years. Then let me fix it. Let me make it right. You can't fix this with money, Ellis. You can't buy your way back into our lives. I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm trying to be the father I should have been all along." Lena laughed, but it was a broken sound that held no humor. 3 years too late. It's never too late. Isn't it? Because in about 10 minutes, Frank Brussels is going to realize that you can't actually do half the things you threatened him with. He's going to come back here angrier than before, and this time you won't be here to save us. Ellis pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact. "Mike, it's me again. I need a full security detail on the Riverside Apartments building, Unit 4B. Round-the-clock protection until further notice." He ended the call and looked back at Lena. "Now I can." "For how long? A week? A month? Until you get bored with playing house and disappear again." "I told you, I'm not leaving again. You told me a lot of things 3 years ago too." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door, not the aggressive pounding Frank had used, but a gentle, professional sound. Through the window, Ellis could see 2 men in dark suits standing in the hallway. "That's my security team," he explained, moving toward the door. "They'll make sure you're safe while we figure this out." "While we figure what out?" Ellis paused with his hand on the doorknob, turning back to face his family, because that's what they were, no matter how broken or complicated the relationship had become. "While we figure out how to be a family again." The words hung in the air as he opened the door to speak with his security team, leaving Lena and Kara alone with the echoes of promises that had been broken before and the desperate hope that maybe, this time, things could be different. But neither of them knew that Frank Brussels was already planning his revenge, or that Ellis's dramatic rescue had set in motion events that would test their family in ways none of them could imagine. The little girl who had begged for protection was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous threats come from the people who claim they are trying to help. 2 hours later, Kara sat cross-legged on the floor of their tiny living room, carefully arranging the takeout containers that her father had ordered from the fancy Italian restaurant downtown. She'd never seen so much food in their apartment: garlic bread, pasta with real cheese, salad that didn't come from a bag, and dessert that looked like something from a magazine. "Daddy, did you really live in a big house with a swimming pool?" she asked, opening a container of tiramisu with reverent fingers. Ellis sat beside her on the floor, having traded his expensive suit jacket for rolled-up sleeves. "I still do, sweetheart. And it still has your bedroom, exactly the way you left it. With my princess bed. With your princess bed, your toy box, and all the books we used to read together." Across the room, Lena watched the interaction with conflicted emotions warring across her face. The security guards Ellis had posted were visible through the window: professional, alert, expensive. The kind of protection that money could buy but love couldn't guarantee. "Kara, why don't you eat in the kitchen?" Lena suggested gently. "Daddy and I need to talk." "Are you going to fight again?" The innocent question hit both parents like a physical blow. Kira remembered their fights. Of course she did. Children always remembered the worst moments, even when adults tried to shield them. "We're going to try very hard not to fight," Ellis said, his voice gentle. "We're going to try to understand each other better." Kira gathered her food and reluctantly moved to the small kitchen table, but both adults knew she could hear every word from there. Some conversations couldn't be delayed just because little ears were listening. 3 years, Lena said quietly, settling onto the couch across from where Ellis remained on the floor. 3 years of silence, Ellis. Do you have any idea what that was like? "I tried to contact you," he said, the words coming out defensive despite his efforts to stay calm. "After the first month, I tried calling. The number was disconnected. I tried email, bounced back. I even hired a private investigator to." "To what?" Track down your ex-wife like some kind of fugitive. To make sure you and Kira were okay. Ellis's voice rose, then he caught himself, glancing toward the kitchen where their daughter was pretending not to listen. Lena, you told me to leave. You said you never wanted to see me again, that Kira was better off without me. I said that because I was angry and hurt and scared, Lena admitted, her voice breaking slightly. But you didn't fight for us, Ellis. You just left. Because you asked me to leave. I asked you to leave for the weekend. I asked you to give me space to think, to figure out how we could fix what was broken between us. I never asked you to disappear from our lives completely. The revelation hit Ellis like a physical blow. 3 years of believing she'd wanted him gone. 3 years of respecting what he'd thought were her wishes. 3 years of staying away to protect them from his apparent toxicity. You said. He struggled to remember the exact words from that terrible night. You said Kira deserved better than a father who was never home, who cared more about building his company than building his family. And you do remember what you said back. Ellis's face went pale as the memory surfaced. Words spoken in anger and exhaustion and the desperate need to justify choices he wasn't sure he could defend. I said that maybe you were right. That maybe she was better off without me. And then you packed a bag and left. Not for a weekend, Ellis. Forever. From the kitchen came the sound of Kira's chair scraping against the floor, and both parents turned to see her standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. You left because of me, she whispered. Because I wasn't good enough. No. Both parents spoke simultaneously, their argument forgotten in the face of their daughter's pain. Baby, no, Lena said, opening her arms as Kira ran to her. Daddy didn't leave because of you. Daddy left because Mommy and Daddy were having problems talking to each other. But if I was better, if I was quieter, if I didn't ask for so many things. Kira, look at me. Ellis moved to kneel in front of his daughter, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You are smart and brave and kind, and leaving you was the biggest mistake of my entire life. Then why did you stay away so long? The question hung in the air like an accusation. How could he explain to a 7-year-old that adults sometimes got so lost in their own pain that they forgot what really mattered? Because I was scared, he admitted. I was scared that I wasn't a good enough daddy for you. But you are good enough, Kira said with the absolute certainty that only children possessed. You saved us from the scary man. Before Ellis could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Mike Webb, his head of security and the closest thing he had to a friend. I should take this, he said apologetically. Mike, what's the situation? We have a problem. Mike's voice carried tension that made Ellis's stomach clench. Frank Brussels didn't just disappear after your encounter. He's been making calls, reaching out to some very dangerous people. What kind of people? The kind who don't like rich guys throwing their weight around in their territory. Ellis, Brussels has connections to the Castellano organization, but not the legitimate side that you work with. He's tied up with the street-level operations, drugs, extortion, money laundering. Ellis glanced at Lena and Kira, lowering his voice. Are you saying my family is in more danger now than before? I'm saying that by confronting Brussels, you painted a target on all of you. Word on the street is that someone's put a price on teaching you a lesson about respecting the local hierarchy. How much of a price? $50,000. Dead or alive? The phone nearly slipped from Ellis's numb fingers. In trying to protect his family, he'd made them targets of the very people who could destroy them. Mike, I need you to increase security immediately. Double the detail, and I want electronic surveillance on the building and the surrounding area. Already in progress. But Ellis, there's something else. Something about your ex-wife that you need to know. What about Lena? She's not as innocent in all this as she appears. The reason Brussels was so confident about pressuring her, the reason he felt safe threatening your daughter, he had inside information. What kind of inside information? Mike was quiet for a moment, the silence stretching long enough to make Ellis's chest tight with dread. Lena's been in contact with someone from your past. Someone who's been feeding information about your business operations to people who want to see you fail. That's impossible. Lena doesn't know anything about my current business. She knows enough. Bank account numbers, property holdings, security protocols. The kind of information that someone could only get from intimate access. Ellis looked across the room at Lena, who was braiding Kira's hair with the kind of gentle attention that spoke of countless quiet moments together. She looked up and smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since he'd arrived. Mike, you're wrong. Whatever information is leaking, it's not coming from Lena. The phone records don't lie, Ellis. 3 calls in the past 2 weeks to a number registered under David Baines. The name hit Ellis like a physical blow. David Baines, his former business partner, the man who'd tried to steal Cross Technologies during a hostile takeover 2 years ago. The man who'd sworn to destroy everything Ellis had built after their partnership ended in litigation and betrayal. David Baines is in prison, Ellis said weakly. David Baines was released 6 months ago, and according to our investigation, he's been very busy rebuilding his network of contacts, including your ex-wife. That's not possible. Lena doesn't even know David exists. She knows him as Daniel Carter, the identity he's been using since his release. And according to the phone records, their conversations have been extensive. The betrayal hit harder than any physical blow. While he'd been building security teams and threatening landlords, thinking he was protecting his family, Lena had been feeding information to his greatest enemy. Ellis. Lena's voice cut through his shock. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. He stared at her, really stared, noting details he'd missed in the emotional chaos of their reunion. She looked tired and worn, yes, but her clothes weren't as shabby as they'd first appeared. Her phone was newer than someone living in poverty should have been able to afford. And there, on her wrist, was a bracelet he didn't recognize, expensive, recent. Lena, he said carefully, have you been talking to anyone about me recently? Anyone who might have asked questions about my business or my security? Something flickered across her face, so quickly that he almost missed it. Fear, guilt, recognition. What kind of questions? Any kind of questions. Have you been in contact with anyone who claimed to know me? Ellis, you're scaring me. What's going on? But even as she spoke, her hand moved unconsciously to cover the bracelet on her wrist. The bracelet that looked exactly like something David Baines would buy for someone. Expensive enough to be impressive, distinctive enough to mark ownership. Who gave you that bracelet, Lena? What bracelet? The one you're trying to hide right now. Lena's face crumpled as if he'd slapped her. It was a gift. From someone who's been helping us. Someone named Daniel Carter. The color drained from her face completely. How do you know that name? Because Daniel Carter is David Baines, and David Baines is the man who tried to destroy my company and steal everything I've worked for. And you've been helping him. No, Lena said desperately. No, that's not what happened. Daniel said he was trying to help you, that he was worried about your mental health after our separation. He said he was a friend who wanted to make sure you were okay. What did you tell him? Nothing important. Just that you seemed to be doing well financially, that you'd built the company into something successful. He asked about security protocols sometimes, but only because he was worried about your safety. What security protocols? The alarm codes for your house. The routes you usually take to work. The names of your security team. Lena's voice was getting smaller with each admission. He said he was planning a surprise for you, something to help us get back together. Ellis felt the world tilting around him. Every piece of sensitive information that David Baines would need to plan an attack, handed over by the woman Ellis loved most in the world, manipulated into betraying him while thinking she was helping. Mommy. Kira's voice cut through the tension. Why is Daddy's face so sad? Neither parent knew how to answer. How could they explain that love and betrayal were sometimes the same thing? That good intentions could lead to devastating consequences. That the family reunion they'd all hoped for was built on lies that were about to destroy them all? Outside, one of the security guards spoke urgently into his radio. Something was happening, vehicles approaching, unusual activity in the neighborhood, the kind of movement that suggested violence was coming. Lena, Ellis said quietly, you need to tell me everything Daniel Carter asked you to do. Right now. Because I think we're about to find out exactly what kind of surprise he was planning. But even as he spoke, Ellis realized that the greatest betrayal wasn't what Lena had done to him. It was what he was about to have to do to both of them to keep them alive. The first explosion shattered the apartment building's front entrance at exactly 9:47 p.m. Ellis threw himself over Kira as glass rained down from their fourth-floor window, while Lena screamed and dove behind the couch. Outside, car alarms shrieked and people shouted in panic as smoke began billowing from the lobby below. Mike! Ellis shouted into his phone. What the hell is happening down there? They are not waiting for subtlety. Mike's voice crackled through gunfire and chaos. Baines brought a small army. Military-grade equipment, professional coordination. This isn't a street gang. This is a paramilitary operation. Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time. The lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness broken only by the orange glow of fires starting to spread through the lower floors. "Daddy, I'm scared," Kira whimpered from beneath him. "I know, baby. We're going to get out of here, okay? We're going to be safe." But even as he spoke the words, Ellis could hear boots on the stairwell, multiple sets, moving with tactical precision toward their floor. David Baines hadn't just planned an attack, he'd planned a siege. "The fire escape," Lena said, her voice shaking but determined. "There's a fire escape outside the kitchen window." "They'll have it covered," Ellis replied, helping Kira to her feet while staying low to avoid the windows. "Baines is too smart to leave obvious escape routes unguarded." "Then what do we do?" Before Ellis could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but somehow he knew exactly who it would be. "Hello, Ellis." David Baines's voice was calm, almost conversational, as if he were calling to discuss dinner plans rather than orchestrating a terrorist attack. "I hope you're enjoying your family reunion." "David, you son of a..." "Language, Ellis. There's a child present, isn't there? Sweet little Kira. 7 years old now, if my information is correct." The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Ellis felt Lena's hand grip his arm, her nails digging into his skin as she heard the name that had destroyed their brief moment of hope. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. Justice. Compensation for what you stole from me." "I didn't steal anything from you. You tried to embezzle from our company, and when I caught you, you attempted a hostile takeover. Everything that happened to you was the consequence of your own choices." David's laugh was soft, almost gentle. "Is that the story you tell yourself? That I was the villain and you were the righteous hero protecting your innocent business empire?" Through the apartment's thin walls, they could hear doors being kicked in on other floors. Baines's men were searching methodically, room by room, working their way toward them. "Let me tell you a different story," David continued. "About a young immigrant who worked 16-hour days to build a technology company from nothing. Who trusted his American business partner to handle the legal and financial side while he focused on innovation. Who discovered too late that his partner had been systematically cutting him out of the business they'd built together. That's not what happened. Isn't it? When Cross Technologies went public, whose name was on the patents, Ellis? When the IPO made you a multimillionaire overnight, how much did I receive for the algorithms I'd designed?" Ellis felt his chest tighten as memories he'd tried to suppress came flooding back. The legal maneuvering, the contract modifications, the way he'd gradually assumed more control while David focused on the technical development. "You were compensated fairly. I was given a salary while you took ownership of everything I created. And when I tried to claim what was rightfully mine, you had me arrested for theft. Theft of my own work, Ellis." Lena was staring at him with growing horror as she began to understand that the man she'd once loved might not be the victim in this story. "You embezzled $2 million, Ellis said weakly. "I tried to withdraw my share of the company I'd built. Money that belonged to me but was being held in accounts I couldn't access because you'd changed all the authorizations." The building shook again as another explosion echoed from below. But the physical danger felt secondary to the moral ground shifting beneath Ellis's feet. "David, even if that's true, this isn't the way to. 5 years in federal prison, Ellis. 5 years of my life stolen because you needed a scapegoat for your own greed. 5 years of missing my daughter's childhood while you built a fortune on my innovations. Your daughter." The words hit the air like a bomb detonating. Through the darkness, Ellis could see Lena's face go white as she understood the implication. "Kara is my biological daughter," David said simply. "DNA doesn't lie, even when mothers do." "That's impossible," Ellis whispered, but even as he spoke, pieces were clicking into place. Kira's mathematical aptitude, her intuitive understanding of complex patterns, the way she approached problems with the same systematic logic that had made David Baines a genius programmer. "Lena had an affair with me 6 months before you two separated," David continued relentlessly. "She never told you because she wasn't sure who the father was. But I've been sure for 3 years, ever since I had the DNA test run." Ellis looked at Lena, seeing confirmation in her silence. "Is it true?" "I didn't know," she whispered. I hoped. You hoped I was the father because it was more convenient than admitting you'd been sleeping with my business partner," Ellis finished, the betrayal cutting deeper than any financial crime. "It wasn't like that. David and I, we were just friends, and one night when you were traveling, when I was lonely and scared about our marriage. Stop. Ellis held up his hand, unable to process any more revelations while explosions echoed around them. Whatever happened 3 years ago, whatever the truth is about Kira's parentage, we need to focus on keeping her alive right now. But David Baines wasn't finished. Here's what's going to happen. His voice continued through the phone. You're going to transfer ownership of Cross Technologies back to me. All of it. Every patent, every subsidiary, every dollar you've made from my work. You're going to give me back the life you stole. And in exchange, I'll let you and Lena live. But Kira comes with me. She's my daughter, and she deserves to know her real father. The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence. Outside, the sound of boots on the stairwell was getting closer, 4th floor, then 5th, working methodically toward their 6th-floor apartment. You have exactly 60 seconds to decide, David said. Sign over the company and walk away, or watch your family burn in a building that's about to collapse around you. Ellis looked at his daughter, or the girl he'd thought was his daughter, who was clutching Lena's hand and staring at him with absolute trust that he would protect her. She didn't understand the adult complexities swirling around her. She only knew that her daddy had come home and made her feel safe. 30 seconds, David announced. Lena grabbed Ellis's arm. What are we going to do? For 3 years, Ellis had built his fortune by making calculated decisions based on profit and loss, risk and reward. But looking at Kira's frightened face, he realized that some choices couldn't be reduced to mathematics. We're going to fight, he said quietly. For her. For us. For the right to be a family, regardless of biology. Ellis is her biological father. He has legal rights. He's a terrorist who's trying to murder a 7-year-old girl to get revenge on me. Biology doesn't give him the right to traumatize her. Ellis's phone buzzed with a text message. Time's up. The apartment door exploded inward as Baines's men burst through with military precision. But instead of the terrified family they expected to find, they discovered an empty apartment and an open window where a fire escape ladder had been deployed. Because while David Baines had been making threats and delivering ultimatums, Ellis had been making different calculations. He'd been remembering the building's layout from his security briefing, plotting escape routes, and sending silent text messages to Mike about contingency plans. The family was already 3 buildings away, moving through a network of rooftops and service tunnels that Mike had mapped hours earlier. They were scared, they were running for their lives, and their relationships had been shattered by revelations that changed everything they thought they knew about each other. But they were alive. And they were together. Where are we going? Kira asked as they climbed down a fire escape into an alley behind a neighboring building. Somewhere safe, Ellis promised, though he wasn't sure such a place existed anymore. Because David Baines wasn't just fighting for money or revenge. He was fighting for his daughter. And a man fighting for his child was capable of anything. As sirens wailed in the distance and smoke continued to pour from the building they'd escaped, Ellis realized that saving his family would require more than money or security teams. It would require him to risk everything he'd built to protect everything that actually mattered. The businessman who'd once calculated every decision was about to discover that some battles could only be won by the heart. But first, he had to figure out how to keep them alive long enough to fight for their future. The safe house was a converted warehouse in an industrial district where the hum of machinery masked the sound of whispered conversations and the occasional sob. Ellis had bought the property 2 years earlier through a shell corporation, one of many contingency plans he'd hoped never to use. It's not exactly the Ritz, he said apologetically as he led Lena and Kira through the steel door into what looked more like a bunker than a home. It has walls and a roof, Lena replied, her voice carrying exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. After tonight, that feels like luxury. Kira pressed close to her mother's side, her small hand clutched in Lena's fingers as she took in their new surroundings. The warehouse had been converted with basic living quarters, beds, a kitchenette, bathroom facilities, and enough supplies to last several weeks. But it felt like a prison, despite being designed as a sanctuary. There are toys in that cabinet, Ellis said gently, pointing to a storage unit along one wall. I had Mike stock it with things for a 7-year-old girl. Just in case. Just in case of what? Kira asked, her voice smaller than usual. Just in case we needed somewhere safe to stay while Daddy figured out how to fix the problems with the bad man, Lena answered, smoothing her daughter's hair with trembling fingers. But both adults knew the truth was more complicated than that explanation. David Baines wasn't just a bad man. He was Kira's biological father, A brilliant strategist with unlimited resources and absolutely nothing left to lose. Ellis's phone buzzed with a message from Mike, building secured. No sign of pursuit, but Baines's people are expanding their search radius. Recommend staying put for minimum 48 hours. Mike says we're safe for now, Ellis reported, though the words felt hollow. They'd been safe in their apartment too, until Baines's men had blown up the building. For now, Lena repeated bitterly. And then what? We can't hide forever, Ellis. Kara needs to go to school. She needs stability. She needs to stay alive, Ellis interrupted. Everything else is secondary. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like she needs parents who aren't lying to each other about fundamental truths. The accusation hung in the air between them while Kira pretended to examine the toys, her young mind processing far more of the adult drama than either parent realized. Lena, I know you're angry. I'm not angry, Ellis. I'm terrified. Terrified that I've destroyed my daughter's life by making choices I thought were protecting her. What choices? Lena was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on Kira rather than meeting Ellis's gaze. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel, David, he didn't just call me 3 weeks ago. He's been in contact for 6 months. Ellis felt something cold settle in his stomach. What do you mean, in contact? He reached out right after his release from prison. Said he'd been thinking about our conversation from years ago, about how I'd mentioned being unhappy in my marriage. He was gentle, understanding. He listened when I talked about how hard things had been since you left. Lena, let me finish. He offered to help, small amounts of money at first, just enough to catch up on bills. He said it was his way of making amends for the role he'd played in destroying our family. Ellis closed his eyes, seeing the manipulation with crystal clarity. David Baines had been playing a long game, positioning himself as a savior while gathering intelligence and building emotional dependence. He asked you to move to that specific apartment, didn't he? He said the neighborhood was safer, that the rent was more reasonable. I thought he was being kind. He was setting up a trap. The apartment, the landlord, even Frank Brussels, all of it was designed to create a crisis that would bring me running. But why? If he just wanted to see Kira, why not approach us directly? Why the elaborate scheme? Before Ellis could answer, his secure phone rang. Only 3 people had this number: Mike, his lawyer, and the head of his company's cybersecurity division. Sir, this is Jennifer Kim from Cyber Defense. I'm sorry to call so late, but we have a critical situation. What kind of situation? Someone has been systematically accessing your personal and business accounts over the past 6 months. Bank records, property holdings, security protocols, employee files, everything. Ellis felt the walls closing in around him. How much access? Complete access. Whoever did this has administrative privileges equivalent to your own. They could transfer funds, modify security systems, even access personnel records for your entire organization. Jennifer, I need you to tell me exactly when this access began. The first breach occurred on March 15th. Does that date mean anything to you? Ellis looked at Lena, seeing the recognition in her eyes. March 15th was 3 days after David Baines had been released from prison. Jennifer, can you trace the access point? That's the concerning part, sir. The breaches originated from multiple locations, but they all required physical access to devices with your personal authentication codes. What kind of devices? Personal computers, mobile phones, tablets, devices that someone with intimate knowledge of your security habits would know how to compromise. Ellis's gaze shifted to Lena's purse, where her phone was charging. The phone that David Baines had been calling for 6 months. The phone that had been in their apartment, their old house, every secure location they'd inhabited. Lena, he said quietly, I need to see your phone. What? Why? Because I think David has been using it to access my systems. Lena handed over her phone with hands that had started shaking again. Ellis powered it on and immediately saw applications that shouldn't have been there. Sophisticated tracking software, data mining programs, remote access tools disguised as innocent games and utilities. Oh my God, Lena whispered. He's been spying on us this whole time. Not just spying. Stealing. Corporate secrets, financial information, security protocols, everything he'd need to destroy my company and my life. But why involve Kira? Why not just take the information and disappear? Ellis was about to answer when Kira's voice cut through their conversation. Because he wants to be my daddy. Both adults turned to stare at the 7-year-old, who had abandoned her toys and was watching them with an understanding that seemed far too mature for her age. "Sweetheart, you don't understand what's happening," Lena said gently. "I understand more than you think," Kira replied, her voice carrying a gravity that made both parents' hearts ache. "The man on the phone, Daniel, he called me last week when you were at work." "What?" Lena's voice came out as a strangled whisper. "He said he was a friend of Daddy's who wanted to make sure I was okay. He asked me lots of questions about Daddy, what he looked like, how he talked, what kind of car he drove." Ellis felt rage building in his chest like a physical force. "What else did he ask you?" "He asked if I missed having a daddy who lived with us. He said maybe someday I could have a daddy who would never leave, who would always be there to protect me." The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. David Baines hadn't just been gathering intelligence, he'd been grooming a 7-year-old girl, building an emotional connection that would make her eventual kidnapping feel like rescue. "Kira," Ellis said, kneeling in front of his daughter, "did he ask you to keep these conversations secret?" "He said it would be a special surprise for you and Mommy. He said if I told you about our talks, it might ruin the surprise." Classic predator behavior, Ellis realized with sickening clarity. David Baines hadn't just been planning corporate revenge, he'd been executing a sophisticated child abduction scheme disguised as parental rights. Lena collapsed onto one of the warehouse's makeshift beds, her face buried in her hands. "I gave him access to everything. Our location, our routines, even conversations with our daughter. I handed him every tool he needed to destroy us." "You couldn't have known," Ellis said, though the words felt inadequate. "Couldn't I? A mysterious benefactor appears just when I need help most, asking for nothing in return except occasional information about my ex-husband? How could I have been so naive? Because you were desperate. Because you were trying to survive with a small child and no support system. Because he's a master manipulator who spent 5 years in prison planning exactly how to exploit your vulnerabilities." Ellis's phone buzzed with another message from Mike. "Baines's people have withdrawn from the apartment building area. Unusual tactical decision. Suggests they're confident about finding you through other means." "They are not searching for us anymore," Ellis said grimly. "They are waiting for us to come to them." "What does that mean?" Before Ellis could answer, a new voice spoke from the warehouse's intercom system, a voice that made all 3 family members freeze with terror. "Hello, my dear family," David Baines said, his words echoing through speakers that shouldn't have been connected to any outside system. "I hope you're comfortable in your temporary accommodations." Ellis spun toward the security panel, frantically checking systems that should have been completely isolated from external networks. "Don't bother, Ellis," David continued conversationally. "I've had access to this location for 18 months. Ever since you purchased it through Meridian Holdings, the shell company that I've been monitoring since my release. The trap was complete. Every contingency plan, every backup location, every security measure, all compromised because David Baines had been playing a game that was 18 months ahead of Ellis's defensive thinking. What do you want?" Ellis shouted at the speakers. "I want my daughter. And I want you to understand that there's nowhere you can run where I won't find you." "Daddy." Kira's voice was small and frightened. "Is the man on the phone the same man who called me?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Why does he want to take me away from you and Mommy?" Ellis looked at Lena, seeing his own desperation reflected in her eyes. How could they explain to a 7-year-old that the adults in her life had created a situation so complex and dangerous that her safety depended on choices none of them fully understood? "Because sometimes, baby," Lena said softly, "adults make mistakes that hurt the people they love. And sometimes those mistakes take a very long time to fix." David's voice returned through the speakers, but now it carried a different tone, softer, more personal. "Kira, sweetheart, this is Daniel, the man you've been talking to on the phone." "Daniel." Kira's face lit up with recognition and confusion. "Why are you talking through the wall?" "Because the people you're with right now don't want us to be together. But I have something very important to tell you." "Don't listen to him," Ellis said quickly, moving toward Kira. But David Baines had spent months building a relationship with this child, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had earned her trust. "Kira, I'm your real daddy. The man who's been taking care of you is very nice, but he's not your biological father. I am." The words hit the warehouse like an explosion. Kira looked back and forth between the adults in her life, her young mind struggling to process a truth that would reshape her understanding of everything. "Is that true?" she asked Lena. "It's complicated, baby." "Is it true?" Kira's voice carried a new edge, the beginning of the anger that would define much of her adolescence if this situation wasn't resolved properly. Yes, Lena whispered. It's true. Kira turned to look at Ellis with eyes that held a mixture of betrayal and confusion that would haunt him for the rest of his life. So you're not my real daddy. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Ellis realized that the greatest battle wasn't going to be fought with security teams or corporate lawyers. It was going to be fought for the heart and mind of a little girl who no longer knew which adults in her life were telling her the truth. Kira, sweetheart, would you like to see something special? David Baines's voice through the warehouse speakers had taken on the gentle, coaxing tone that Ellis recognized from every documentary about predators he'd ever watched. But this predator wasn't a stranger. He was a brilliant man who had spent 3 years in prison planning this exact moment. Don't answer him, Ellis said urgently, but Kira was already walking toward the speakers with the curiosity that made 7-year-olds so vulnerable to manipulation. What kind of something special? She asked. A video of your real mommy and daddy when we were happy together, before the mean man took me away from you. Lena's face went white. David, don't. Oh, but I think it's time for everyone to know the truth, don't you, Lena? The whole truth about why you really called me that night 8 years ago. The warehouse's main screen flickered to life, displaying a video that made Ellis's world tilt sideways. It showed Lena, younger, pregnant, sitting in what looked like David Baines's apartment, speaking directly to the camera with an intimacy that suggested this wasn't their first recorded conversation. Are you sure about this plan? Video Lena was saying, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Ellis trusts you. He considers you his best friend. That's exactly why it will work, David's voice replied from behind the camera. He'll never suspect that his business partner and his wife are planning to take everything he's built. Present-day Lena collapsed onto the floor as if her legs had given out. That's not how it happened. Isn't it? David's voice carried cruel amusement. Shall we watch the rest? On screen, pregnant Lena continued. But what if he finds out before the baby is born? What if he realizes Kira isn't his? He won't. Men like Ellis see what they want to see. He'll be so excited about becoming a father that he won't question the timing. And by the time he might get suspicious, we'll have already transferred his assets to accounts he can't access. Ellis stared at the screen, feeling 8 years of his life recontextualizing itself with sickening clarity. Kira's conception hadn't been an affair born of loneliness. It had been a calculated strategy to create leverage. The pregnancy was planned, he whispered. Of course it was planned, David's voice confirmed. Did you really think it was coincidence that Lena got pregnant just 3 months after you'd made me a signatory on all your business accounts? Just 2 months after you'd given me access to your personal financial information. Kira looked back and forth between the adults in her life, trying to understand why everyone seemed so upset about a video of her mommy talking about her birth. I don't understand, she said. Why is everyone crying? On the screen, the video continued with David's voice asking pregnant Lena, and you're certain you can make him fall in love with the baby, even knowing she's not his? Ellis has always wanted to be a father. He'll love her regardless of genetics. That's the kind of man he is, which is what makes him so easy to manipulate. The words hit Ellis like physical blows. Not just the betrayal, but the casual cruelty of it. The dismissive way Lena had described his capacity for love as a weakness to be exploited. Stop it, present-day Lena sobbed. Please, David, stop it. She doesn't need to see this. She needs to understand who her real parents are, David replied, and who has been lying to her for her entire life. But the video wasn't finished. On screen, David was asking, what if Cross gets suspicious about the financial transfers? He won't. I'll start a fight with him, make him think our marriage is falling apart because of his work obsession. Men like Ellis always blame themselves when relationships fail. He'll be so focused on trying to win me back that he won't notice money disappearing from accounts he rarely monitors. And after the baby is born, after Kara is born, I'll file for divorce and take half of everything, including the half you'll have already transferred to our joint accounts. Ellis will think he's lost his family because he was a bad husband. He'll never realize he was robbed by the 2 people he trusted most. The video ended, leaving the warehouse in devastating silence. Kara stood in the middle of the room, looking at the 3 adults who had apparently been planning to steal from her daddy since before she was born. Mommy, she said in a small voice, did you really say those mean things about Daddy? Lena couldn't speak through her tears. The truth was even worse than the video suggested, because the plan hadn't been entirely successful. When Kara was born and Lena held her daughter for the first time, something had changed. The baby she'd conceived as a tool of manipulation had become the most important thing in her world. Lena tried to back out, David's voice explained, as if reading her thoughts. When Kara was 6 months old, she suddenly developed a conscience. She confessed everything to Ellis in a moment of guilt and begged for forgiveness. Ellis's memories shifted again, like looking at a familiar photograph from a different angle. The night Lena had told him about the affair, he'd thought it was a confession born of guilt. But it had actually been a confession born of betrayal, because she'd tried to abandon their conspiracy and David had threatened to expose everything. "That's why you really left," Ellis said slowly. "Not because I couldn't forgive the affair, but because you knew I could never forgive the conspiracy." "I left because I was trying to protect you," Lena said desperately. "David threatened to destroy you completely if I didn't keep my distance. I thought if I stayed away, he might leave you alone. So you've been protecting me by letting me believe I was a failure as a husband and father. I've been protecting you by keeping David from taking everything you worked for." David's laughter echoed through the speakers. "Oh, Lena. Still trying to play the martyr, I see. Shall we tell Ellis about the real reason you stayed in contact with me all these years?" "Don't," Lena whispered. "About the monthly payments I've been sending you since Kira was born. The payments that came from profits I made by short-selling Ellis's stock whenever I knew his company was facing difficulties." Ellis felt something break inside his chest. "You've been taking money from him this whole time." "It was for Kira. To make sure she had everything she needed while you were building your new life. Money stolen from my company. Money that David made by betting against my success. I didn't know where it came from." "Yes, you did," David's voice corrected gently. "We discussed it in detail every month when you provided status reports about Ellis's mental health and business activities. The betrayal was so complete, so overwhelming, that Ellis couldn't process it all at once. His wife hadn't just had an affair, she'd been running a long-term intelligence operation. His business partner hadn't just embezzled money, he'd been orchestrating a decade-long scheme to systematically destroy everything Ellis built. And his daughter, the child he'd loved more than his own life, had been conceived as a weapon against him. "Daddy." Kara's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. "Are you mad at me?" The question shattered what remained of his composure. "No, baby. I'm not mad at you. None of this is your fault. But I'm not really your daughter, am I?" How could he answer that question? How could he explain that biology was just genetics, but love was choice? How could he tell a 7-year-old that she was the most important thing in his world even though she'd been conceived as part of a plan to destroy him? "You're my daughter in every way that matters," he said, kneeling in front of her. "But not in the way that's real." Before Ellis could respond, David's voice returned with the kind of gentle authority that made children want to trust him. "Kara, sweetheart, your real daddy has a house with a big backyard and a swimming pool. I have toys and books and everything a little girl could want. And I promise I will never lie to you the way the adults around you have been lying." "David, please," Lena begged. "She's just a child. Don't use her to hurt us." "I'm not using her to hurt you. I'm offering her a chance to know her real father, something you've denied both of us for 7 years." Kara looked at Ellis with eyes that held a mixture of love and confusion and growing resentment. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" "Because I was trying to protect you from complicated adult problems." "But you were lying to me." "I was trying to. Everyone's been lying to me." Kira's voice rose to a shout that echoed through the warehouse. "Mommy lied about Daddy being my real daddy. You lied about being my real daddy. Everyone's been lying about everything." She ran to the far corner of the warehouse and curled up behind a stack of boxes, her small body shaking with sobs that broke Ellis's heart into pieces. David's voice spoke again, but now it was directed specifically at the crying child. "Kara, baby, I know you're scared and confused. But I want you to know that I have never lied to you. Not once. When we talked on the phone, I always told you the truth." Through her tears, Kara called out, "You said you were Daddy's friend." "I said I was someone who cared about your daddy and wanted to make sure he was okay. That was true. I do care about Ellis, enough to want him to face the consequences of what he did to me." "What did Daddy do to you?" "He stole my work, got me sent to prison, and kept me away from you for the first 7 years of your life." Ellis watched his daughter processing this information, seeing her small mind trying to reconcile the father she'd loved with the villain David was painting him to be. "Is that true, Daddy?" she asked. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Ellis realized he didn't have a clear answer. Had he manipulated the legal system to push David out of their company? Had he been so focused on protecting his own interests that he'd failed to consider David's rights? Had he built his fortune on someone else's innovations while telling himself he was just a better businessman? It's complicated, sweetheart. That's what adults always say when they don't want to tell the truth, Kara replied with devastating accuracy. Mike's voice crackled through Ellis's earpiece. Sir, we have a serious problem. Baines's people have surrounded the building. We're completely cut off. How many? At least 20 vehicles, professional coordination. This isn't a rescue operation, it's a siege. Through the warehouse's security monitors, Ellis could see armed figures taking positions around their location. David Baines hadn't just found them, he'd trapped them with the systematic precision of a military operation. David, Ellis said aloud, what do you want to end this? I want my daughter. I want my company. And I want you to understand what it feels like to lose everything you care about. And if I give you those things, then Lena gets to live. You get to live. And Kira gets to grow up with her real father instead of the man who stole her from me. Kira emerged from behind the boxes, her face streaked with tears but her expression determined. I want to talk to my real daddy, she said. The words hit Ellis like a knife to the chest. After everything, after 7 years of bedtime stories and scraped-knee bandages and proud moments at school plays, his daughter was choosing the man who had destroyed their family. Kira, Lena started. No, Kira shouted. I want to talk to the daddy who never lied to me. David's voice became warm and loving in a way that made Ellis's skin crawl. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here. Are you really going to take me away from Mommy and Daddy Ellis? Only if you want me to. I would never force you to do anything you don't want to do. But they lied to me. Yes, they did. But they lied because they were scared and confused. Sometimes adults make bad choices when they are afraid. The manipulation was masterful, positioning himself as the understanding parent while undermining Ellis and Lena's credibility. What would happen if I came to live with you? You would have your own room, your own toys, your own everything. And I would tell you the truth about everything, always. Could I still see Mommy and Daddy Ellis sometimes? David paused just long enough for the implication to sink in. That would depend on whether they've learned to tell the truth. Kara walked to the center of the warehouse, looking at each adult in turn. At 7 years old, she was being forced to make a choice that would define the rest of her life. I want to go with my real daddy, she said quietly. And Ellis felt everything he'd ever loved slip away in the space of a single sentence. The silence that followed Kira's declaration stretched like an eternity. Ellis stared at the little girl he'd raised from infancy, seeing a stranger looking back at him with eyes that held disappointment and betrayal. The child who used to run to him for protection was now running away from him toward a man who had spent years planning this exact moment. Kira, sweetheart, Lena said desperately, you don't understand what you're saying. You can't just. I can't what? Kira's voice carried a sharpness that seemed far too mature for 7 years old. I can't choose my real daddy over people who lied to me my whole life. We lied to protect you, Ellis said, his voice breaking despite his efforts to stay strong. No, you lied to protect yourselves, Kara replied with devastating accuracy. You didn't want me to know the truth because then I might not love you anymore. Through the warehouse speakers, David Baines's voice carried paternal warmth that made Ellis's stomach twist with rage and helplessness. You're very smart, Kara. Much smarter than the adults around you have given you credit for. Thank you, Daddy David. The name hit Ellis like a physical blow. In the space of an hour, he'd gone from being daddy to being replaced by a man who had manipulated and terrorized them. David, Ellis said, looking directly at the security camera he knew was transmitting his image. If you want to destroy me, fine. But don't use an innocent child as your weapon. I'm not using her as a weapon. I'm reclaiming my daughter from the people who stole her from me. You can't just take her. There are legal processes, custody procedures. David's laughter cut through his words like broken glass. Legal processes? Like the legal process you used to have me arrested for theft when I tried to claim ownership of my own innovations. Like the custody arrangements you've been violating for 7 years by letting Kira believe you were her biological father. Ellis's phone buzzed with a message from Mike. Sir, Baines's vehicles are moving. He's coming inside. He's here, Ellis announced grimly. Through the warehouse's reinforced windows, they could see black SUVs pulling up to the loading dock. Men in tactical gear emerged with the efficient movements of a professional security team. Not thugs or criminals, but the kind of expensive protection that only legitimate wealth could afford. Daddy David is coming to get me, Kira asked, and for the first time since making her choice, she sounded uncertain. Yes, sweetheart, David's voice confirmed. I'm coming to take you home where you belong. The warehouse's main door opened with a hydraulic hiss, and David Baines stepped inside flanked by 4 security guards. He looked exactly like Ellis remembered, tall, lean, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from brilliant intelligence and unlimited resources. But there was something harder in his face now, something that prison had carved into his features. Hello, Kira, he said gently, ignoring the adults completely. It's so wonderful to finally meet you in person. Kira hung back, suddenly shy in the presence of the man she'd been talking to on the phone for months. You look different than I imagined. Do I? How did you imagine me? Bigger, I guess. And maybe nicer. David smiled, but Ellis could see the calculation behind it. I am nice, sweetheart. I'm just sad that it took so long for us to meet. Because the mean people kept us apart. Because some adults make selfish choices that hurt the people they claim to love. David's eyes shifted to Ellis and Lena, and in that gaze was 8 years of accumulated hatred distilled into pure malice. Ellis, you look well. Prison apparently suits me better than success suits you. David, please. Whatever you want from me, we can negotiate. But don't traumatize Kira to get your revenge. Traumatize her? I'm rescuing her from people who have been lying to her since birth. David knelt down to Kira's eye level. Sweetheart, are you ready to come home with me? Kira looked back at Lena and Ellis, and for a moment her 7-year-old certainty wavered. Will I ever see them again? That depends on whether they learn to respect our relationship. What does that mean? David stood up, his expression shifting from paternal warmth to business-like coldness as he addressed the adults. It means Ellis is going to transfer ownership of Cross Technologies to me, along with all associated assets and accounts. It means Lena is going to sign a custody agreement giving me full parental rights with supervised visitation for her. And it means both of you are going to publicly acknowledge that you've been perpetrating fraud by denying me access to my biological daughter. And if we refuse? Lena asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. Then Kara disappears into a legal system where I have biological rights and unlimited resources to prove you're unfit parents. You'll spend the next decade fighting custody battles you can't win while I raise her to understand exactly what kind of people you really are. Ellis's phone buzzed with another message from Mike. Sir, the building is completely surrounded. But there's something else. Police are approaching from multiple directions. This isn't just a custody dispute anymore. David, Ellis said, what did you do? I filed kidnapping charges against both of you this morning. When the police arrive, they'll find a concerned biological father who tracked down his daughter after discovering she was being held in an illegal safe house by people with no legal custody rights. The trap was perfect in its simplicity. David had manipulated them into a situation where their own protective measures would be used as evidence against them. The secure warehouse, the armed guards, the isolation, all of it would look like a kidnapping operation to law enforcement. You can't be serious, Lena whispered. I'm her mother. You're a woman who conspired to defraud my daughter's biological father of his parental rights while accepting money obtained through illegal means. The courts will be very interested in those monthly payments you've been receiving. Sirens were audible in the distance now, growing louder as multiple police units approached their location. Daddy Ellis. Kara's voice was small and frightened. Why are the police coming? Ellis knelt beside her, knowing these might be his last moments as her father. Because sometimes adults make mistakes, and other adults have to come help fix them. Did you make a mistake? I made a lot of mistakes, sweetheart. But loving you was never one of them. Tears were streaming down Kira's face as she began to understand that her choice had consequences she hadn't anticipated. I don't want you to get in trouble. It's going to be okay, baby. No matter what happens, you remember that you are the most important thing in the world to me. David's security team moved to positions near the door as the police sirens grew louder. Through the windows, Ellis could see law enforcement vehicles surrounding the building with the coordinated efficiency of a major operation. David, Ellis said desperately, you've won. You're getting everything you wanted. But please don't destroy Kira's relationship with the only mother she's ever known. The mother who taught her that lying and manipulation are acceptable when they serve your purposes. The mother who has raised her with love and sacrifice for 7 years. The mother who used her as a tool to steal millions of dollars. Lena stepped forward, her face streaked with tears but her voice steady. David, I'll give you anything you want. Full custody, the public acknowledgement, whatever legal documents you need. But please don't make Kira watch her family be destroyed. Her family was destroyed years ago when you and Ellis conspired to steal her from me. The warehouse door burst open as police officers flooded inside, weapons drawn and voices shouting commands. Ellis instinctively moved to shield Kira, but David's security team was already positioning themselves as the protective force while Mike and his men were suddenly cast as the kidnappers. Mr. Baines. The lead detective approached David with the deference shown to victims rather than suspects. I'm Detective Rodriguez. We received your report about your daughter being held against her will. Thank you for responding so quickly, David replied with perfect composure. As you can see, my daughter appears to be unharmed, but she's been kept in this warehouse by these individuals who have no legal custody rights. Daddy David, Kira said urgently, tugging on his sleeve, tell them that Daddy Ellis and Mommy aren't bad people. Sweetheart, you don't need to protect people who have been lying to you. But I don't want them to go to jail. Sometimes people have to face consequences for their choices. Detective Rodriguez looked between the adults, clearly trying to understand the family dynamics. Mr. Baines, we'll need to take statements from everyone involved. Can you confirm that you're the biological father of this child? I have DNA testing results, birth certificate amendments, and legal documentation establishing my parental rights. David produced a folder thick with official documents. These individuals have been denying me access to my daughter while maintaining a fraudulent custody arrangement. Is this true? Detective Rodriguez asked Ellis. Ellis looked at Kira, who was watching him with eyes that begged him not to make things worse. It's true that David is her biological father. But the custody situation is more complicated than. The custody situation is quite simple, David interrupted. I have legal rights that have been violated, and I'm exercising those rights now. Mike approached Ellis carefully, speaking in low tones. Sir, we need to leave. Now. This is turning into a legal nightmare that could result in criminal charges. I'm not leaving without Kira. Sir, if you're arrested for kidnapping, you'll lose any chance of maintaining custody rights. David Baines has orchestrated this perfectly. Staying here guarantees you lose everything. Through the chaos of police activity and legal procedures, Ellis heard David speaking quietly to Kira. Sweetheart, we're going to go home now. You're going to have your own room, your own toys, and you'll never have to worry about people lying to you again. What about Mommy? Mommy made some bad choices that have consequences. But maybe someday, if she learns to be honest, we can arrange visits. I want to say goodbye to Daddy Ellis. David hesitated, clearly not wanting to allow any interaction that might undermine his control. But with police watching, he couldn't appear to be the one preventing a child from saying goodbye. You have 1 minute, he said. Kira ran to Ellis, throwing her small arms around his neck with desperate intensity. I'm sorry, Daddy. I didn't know choosing him would mean I couldn't see you anymore. It's not your fault, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. Will you still love me even if I'm not really your daughter? I will love you until the day I die, no matter what anyone else says about biology or custody or legal documents. Promise. I promise. Kira pulled back to look at his face. Daddy Ellis, are you crying? A little bit, but they are not sad tears. They are proud tears, because you're the bravest, smartest, most wonderful little girl in the world. Kira, David's voice cut through their goodbye. It's time to go. As she was led away by David and his security team, Kira looked back over her shoulder with an expression that would haunt Ellis for the rest of his life, love and confusion and the dawning understanding that choices made by adults had consequences for children that could never be undone. Detective Rodriguez approached with handcuffs. Mr. Cross, you're under arrest for custodial interference and kidnapping. You have the right to remain silent. As the cuffs clicked around his wrists, Ellis watched through the warehouse windows as David Baines drove away with Kira's face pressed against the car's rear window, her small hand waving goodbye to the only father she'd ever known. Lena was being arrested too, her own rights being read while she sobbed into her hands. Mike and his security team were being detained for questioning. And David Baines had accomplished something more devastating than simple revenge. He'd legally stolen a child's entire world while making it look like he was the one providing rescue. But as the police car doors slammed shut and the warehouse emptied of everything Ellis had tried to protect, he realized that losing Kira wasn't the end of David's plan. It was just the beginning. The Los Angeles County Jail holding cell smelled like disinfectant and despair. Ellis sat on the narrow bench, still wearing his expensive suit that now felt like a costume from someone else's life. 48 hours ago, he'd been a billionaire with unlimited resources. Now he was inmate number 47291, charged with kidnapping and custodial interference. "Cross, you have a visitor." The guard's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. Ellis followed him through the maze of corridors that separated the incarcerated from the free world, wondering who would visit him here. His lawyer had already come and gone with the devastating news that David Baines's case was airtight: DNA evidence, legal documentation, and a mountain of evidence that painted Ellis as an obsessed ex-husband who had stolen another man's child. But the person waiting in the visitor's room wasn't his lawyer. It was Kira. She sat at the metal table wearing a new dress that probably cost more than Lena used to make in a month, her hair perfectly styled and her small hands folded with the kind of careful composure that made Ellis's heart break. Behind her stood David Baines, watching their interaction with predatory satisfaction. "Hi, Daddy Ellis," Kira said quietly, her voice lacking the spontaneous joy that had once made her greetings the best part of his day. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you doing?" "I'm good. Daddy David bought me lots of new things. I have my own room with a big bed and more toys than I can play with." "That's wonderful, baby." But even as he spoke, Ellis could see the careful distance in her eyes. In just 3 days, David had begun the process of systematically separating Kira from her attachment to him. It was subtle but devastating, the way her affection had been repackaged as polite courtesy. "Kira wanted to see you," David said, his voice carrying false generosity. "I thought it was important for her to understand the consequences of the choices adults make." "What does that mean?" David smiled with the cold satisfaction of someone who had waited years for this moment. "It means she's here to say goodbye, Ellis. Permanently." "I don't understand." "Tell him, sweetheart," David prompted gently. Kira looked down at her hands, her small voice barely audible. "Daddy David says that if I want to be a good daughter and have a happy family, I need to let go of the past and focus on my real life now." "And what does that mean?" "It means I can't see you or Mommy anymore. Because thinking about you makes me confused and sad, and Daddy David says confusion isn't healthy for little girls." The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. David wasn't just taking Kira away, he was convincing her that cutting ties with her previous life was her own idea, something she needed to do for her own emotional health. "Kira," Ellis said carefully, "do you remember what we talked about the last time we saw each other? About how much I love you." "Yes. But Daddy David explained that sometimes adults say things that feel nice but aren't really true. He says you loved the idea of having a daughter more than you loved me specifically." "That's not true, sweetheart. How do I know what's true anymore?" Kira's voice rose slightly, revealing the confusion and pain beneath her composed exterior. "Everyone kept telling me different things, and now I don't know who to believe." David placed a protective hand on Kira's shoulder. "Which is exactly why we decided it would be better to start fresh. New home, new school, new life. No more confusion about complicated adult relationships." "You're moving, huh?" "We're moving to Switzerland next week. I have business opportunities there that will provide Kira with a stable, European education." The words hit Ellis like a physical blow. Switzerland meant international custody laws, diplomatic immunity for the wealthy, and a legal system where David's resources would provide insurmountable advantages. "You can't just take her out of the country. I can take my daughter wherever I believe she'll be happiest and safest. And clearly, Los Angeles holds too many painful memories for her." "Kira," Ellis said desperately, "is this what you want? To move far away where you'll never see any of us again?" Kira looked back and forth between the two men, her 7-year-old mind struggling with concepts that would challenge adults. "I want to be happy. Daddy David says I'll be happier if I don't have to think about sad things all the time." "What sad things?" "Like how Mommy is in jail because of me. And how you're in jail because you tried to protect me from my real daddy. And how everyone got hurt because I was born." The depth of guilt that David had instilled in her was staggering. He'd convinced a 7-year-old that she was responsible for the adult chaos surrounding her, making her desperate to escape the situation by any means necessary. "Kira, none of this is your fault. That's what everyone keeps saying. But if it's not my fault, then why is everyone I love in jail or sad or angry?" David's voice cut through Ellis's response with paternal authority. "Because sometimes adults make bad choices that have consequences for the children they claim to love. But you don't have to keep paying the price for their mistakes." The guard tapped his watch, indicating their time was almost up. Ellis felt panic rising in his chest as he realized this might be the last conversation he would ever have with his daughter. Kara, I need you to remember something, okay? No matter where you go, no matter what anyone tells you, no matter how much time passes, I will always love you. And if you ever need me, if you ever want to come home, I will move heaven and earth to bring you back. But this is my home now, she said, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. Your home is wherever people love you unconditionally. Remember that. David stood up, signaling the end of their visit. Say goodbye, Kara. It's time to start your new life. Kara approached the glass partition that separated them, pressing her small hand against it. Ellis matched her gesture, their palms separated by reinforced glass and a legal system that had failed to protect her. I love you, Daddy Ellis, she whispered. I love you too, sweetheart. More than all the stars in the sky. As David led her away, Kara looked back once with an expression that would haunt Ellis for the rest of his life, love and loss and the terrible understanding that choices made by adults had consequences that children couldn't escape. Alone in the visitor's room, Ellis felt something break inside him that went deeper than heartbreak. David Baines hadn't just stolen his daughter. He'd systematically destroyed her sense of security and belonging, convincing her that abandoning everyone she'd ever loved was the path to happiness. Back in his cell, Ellis stared at the ceiling and tried to process the scope of David's revenge. It wasn't enough to take Kira away. David wanted to make sure she would grow up believing that leaving was her own choice, that the people who had raised her were obstacles to her happiness rather than sources of love. His cellmate, a grizzled man named Rodriguez who'd been watching the family drama unfold, finally spoke. Rough visit. The worst of my life. Kids. My daughter. Or the girl I thought was my daughter. It's complicated. Kids always are. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. You know what I learned in here? Sometimes the only way to save someone you love is to let them go. What if letting them go means they'll be destroyed by the person who takes them? Then you find a way to destroy that person first. The conversation was interrupted by another guard calling Ellis's name. This time, it was his lawyer, a man named Patterson who looked like he'd aged a decade in the past 3 days. Ellis, we have a problem, Patterson said as soon as they were alone in the conference room. Bigger than kidnapping charges and losing my daughter. Much bigger. David Baines isn't just taking Kira to Switzerland. He's planning to have you declared mentally incompetent. What? Patterson spread documents across the table. Psychological evaluations claiming you've suffered a complete break from reality. Medical records suggesting a history of delusional behavior. Witness testimonies about your obsessive attachment to a child who isn't biologically yours. That's insane. None of that is true. It doesn't matter if it's true. It matters if it's convincing. And David Baines has assembled a team of experts who will testify that your behavior over the past 8 years represents a sustained psychological break that makes you a danger to yourself and others. Ellis stared at the fabricated medical reports and falsified psychological profiles. What would mental incompetence mean? It would mean losing all legal rights. Your business, your assets, your freedom, everything would be placed under court-appointed conservatorship. You'd be involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility for an indefinite period. And David would be free to take Kira anywhere he wanted with no interference. Worse than that, if you're declared mentally incompetent, any future attempts to contact Kira could be classified as stalking by a dangerous individual. She would be taught that you're not just a liar, but mentally ill and potentially violent. The trap was perfect in its cruelty. David wasn't just stealing Kira's present. He was poisoning her future, ensuring that even if she someday questioned his version of events, she would be too afraid of Ellis's supposed mental illness to seek him out. What are our options? Patterson looked exhausted. Limited. The competency hearing is tomorrow. David's legal team has presented a compelling case that your recent behavior represents a psychotic break. The kidnapping charges, the warehouse situation, the armed security, it all supports their narrative that you've lost touch with reality. So I'm going to lose everything. Unless we can prove that David Baines has been orchestrating this entire situation as part of an elaborate revenge scheme. But that would require evidence we don't have and witnesses who are either dead, missing, or working for him. Ellis closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 8 years of mistakes pressing down on him. Every choice he'd made, trusting David originally, leaving his family when Lena asked for space, building a fortune while they struggled in poverty, had led to this moment where his daughter was being systematically brainwashed by a man who wanted to erase him from her life completely. Patterson, what if I voluntarily gave up my parental rights? What? What if I signed documents relinquishing all claims to Kira, all attempts to contact her, all legal connections to her life? Would that stop David from pursuing the mental competency case? Patterson stared at him in shock. Ellis, if you give up your parental rights voluntarily, you can never get them back. Even if David's manipulation is exposed years from now, even if Kira wants to reconnect with you as an adult, legally, you would have no relationship to her whatsoever. But she would be free from this legal battle. She wouldn't have to grow up thinking her father figure is mentally ill and dangerous. You're talking about sacrificing any chance of ever being part of her life again. I'm talking about protecting her from being used as a weapon in David's war against me. But even as he spoke the words, Ellis realized there was something else, something Patterson's investigation had missed. David Baines's revenge wasn't complete with taking Kira and destroying Ellis's sanity. There had to be a final move, something that would cement his victory permanently. Patterson, I need you to look into David's business activities since his release from prison. Not just the obvious stuff, but shell companies, investment partnerships, anything that might connect to cross technologies. Why? Because a man like David Baines doesn't spend 5 years in prison planning a simple custody battle. He's building towards something bigger. As if summoned by his suspicion, Ellis's phone rang with a call from Mike. Ellis, thank God. Are you somewhere we can talk privately? I'm with my lawyer. What's happening? I've been monitoring David Baines's activities since your arrest. He's not just taking Kira to Switzerland. He's transferring all his assets there too, including several companies he's acquired over the past 6 months. What companies? Companies that hold patents essential to Cross Technology's core operations. If he controls those patents from Switzerland, he can essentially shut down your business overnight. How is that possible? Because those patents were originally developed using research he did while you two were partners. Research that was legally ambiguous regarding ownership. He's been systematically buying out the companies that hold those patents, and once he's in Switzerland, he'll have the legal standing to claim they were stolen from him originally. The scope of David's long-term planning was breathtaking. Not only would he take Kira away, but he would destroy Cross Technologies from a position where Ellis couldn't retaliate. Kira would grow up believing her adoptive father was a failed businessman who had lost everything through incompetence. Mike, how long do we have? The patent transfers go into effect in 72 hours. Once that happens, Cross Technologies will be legally worthless. Ellis looked at Patterson, seeing his own realization reflected in the lawyer's face. David Baines had engineered a choice that was impossible in its cruelty. Ellis could fight for his business and his sanity, guaranteeing years of legal battles that would traumatize Kira further. Or he could surrender everything, his daughter, his company, his reputation, to protect her from being destroyed by the war between the adults in her life. Patterson, Ellis said quietly, prepare the documents. Which documents? All of them. Voluntary relinquishment of parental rights, transfer of business assets, whatever. David wants to end this without destroying Kira in the process. Ellis, you can't be serious. You'd be giving up everything you've worked for. I'd be saving the only thing I've ever worked for. But even as he made the decision, Ellis knew there was one more move he could make, one final gamble that would either save everything or destroy them all. The question was whether he had the courage to risk Kira's future on a plan that could backfire catastrophically. Time was running out, and the choice between love and justice was about to tear him apart. The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal observers, and financial analysts who understood that what happened here would reshape both a family and a billion-dollar empire. Ellis sat at the defendant's table, having refused his lawyer's advice to wear a subdued suit. Instead, he wore the same clothes Kira had seen him in during their jail visit, wrinkled, imperfect, human. Judge Maria Santos called the court to order as David Baines entered with his legal team. Kira walking beside him in another expensive dress that made her look like a porcelain doll rather than a 7-year-old girl. Your Honor, David's lead attorney began. We're here to finalize the voluntary relinquishment of parental rights by Mr. Ellis Cross, as well as the business asset transfers that will conclude this unfortunate situation. Mr. Cross, Judge Santos addressed Ellis directly. Do you understand that by signing these documents, you will have no legal relationship with this child, and no claim to the business assets you've built over the past 8 years? I understand, Your Honor. And you're making this decision voluntarily, without coercion. Ellis looked across the courtroom at Kira, who was watching him with eyes that held confusion and something that might have been disappointment. She'd been told this was the conclusion of a complicated legal situation, but she was smart enough to understand that something permanent was happening. Your Honor, before I answer that question, I'd like to exercise my right to make a statement. David's attorney immediately objected. Your Honor, this is a simple document signing, not a trial. The man is giving up his life's work and his daughter. Judge Santos interrupted sharply. I think he's entitled to say whatever he needs to say. Proceed, Mr. Cross. Ellis stood up, but instead of addressing the judge, he turned to face Kira directly. Sweetheart, there are some things I need to tell you, and this might be the last chance I get to say them. Daddy Ellis. Kira's voice was small in the formal courtroom setting. I need you to understand something about love, baby. Real love isn't about getting what you want. Real love is about wanting what's best for the person you love, even when it costs you everything. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This wasn't the subdued surrender he'd expected. Your biological father is a very smart man, Ellis continued, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. He's spent years planning how to get you back, and he's been very clever about it. But I want you to watch something, okay? I want you to see the difference between someone who loves you and someone who wants to own you. Ellis pulled out his phone, and despite objections from David's legal team, Judge Santos allowed him to continue. Kira, I'm going to give your father exactly what he's asked for. My company, my money, my legal rights to you, everything. But I'm going to do it in a way that shows you something important about the difference between love and control. He pressed a button on his phone, activating a live stream that began broadcasting to every major social media platform, financial news network, and technology blog simultaneously. My name is Ellis Cross, he said, looking directly into the camera while Kira watched in fascination. And I'm about to transfer $800 million in assets to David Baines, not because he deserves them, but because I love his daughter more than I love money. The courtroom erupted in confusion as reporters realized they were witnessing one of the largest voluntary wealth transfers in corporate history being broadcast live to millions of viewers. David, Ellis continued, still streaming, you wanted to destroy me by taking everything I care about. But you made one crucial mistake. You assumed I cared more about my money than about Kira's happiness. David's face had gone pale as he realized the implications of a live broadcast that couldn't be controlled or edited. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you my company, my patents, my bank accounts, all of it. But I'm going to do it publicly, so that Kira and the entire world can see exactly why. Ellis turned back to Kira, ignoring the chaos around them. Sweetheart, a man who truly loves you will sacrifice anything to protect your happiness. A man who wants to control you will sacrifice your happiness to protect his own interests. Watch carefully and see which one your biological father really is. Ellis, stop this immediately, David said, rising from his seat. Stop what? Giving you everything you asked for. Ellis smiled, but his eyes were hard. I'm transferring ownership of Cross Technologies to you right now, David. $800 million in assets, legally yours as of this moment. He pressed another button on his phone, executing financial transfers that had been prepared by his legal team as part of the surrender documents. But here's the interesting part, Kira. Watch what your biological father does now that he has everything he said he wanted. David's attorney was frantically whispering in his ear, but David was staring at Ellis with growing realization that this wasn't surrender. It was something else entirely. You see, sweetheart, Ellis continued, I spent the last 3 days having my lawyers examine every detail of your father's plan. And I discovered something fascinating. The patents he's been buying, the companies he's been acquiring, the legal strategies he's been using, they all have one fatal flaw. What kind of flaw? Kira asked, genuinely curious despite the adult complexity swirling around her. They are all designed to work against a man who values money more than family. But they fall apart completely when used against someone who's willing to give up everything. Ellis's phone buzzed with confirmations that the transfers were complete. David Baines now legally owned Cross Technologies and all its associated assets. Congratulations, David, Ellis said. You now own a company that's completely worthless. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that Cross Technologies' entire value is based on contracts and partnerships that require my personal involvement. Contracts that become void if ownership is transferred without specific performance guarantees that you can't meet. David's face went white as he understood what Ellis had done. You see, Kira, when someone really loves you, they don't just give you what you want, they teach you the difference between what you want and what you need. Your biological father wanted my company because he thought it would hurt me to lose it. But what he really needed was to learn that some things can't be stolen, only given freely. I don't understand, Kira said. It means that by giving him my company, I've made it impossible for him to profit from it. The patents are worthless without the expertise to implement them. The contracts are void without the relationships to maintain them. He's gotten exactly what he asked for, and it's cost him everything he actually needed. David's attorney was now frantically searching through documents, realizing that their months of legal planning had been undone by Ellis's willingness to sacrifice everything. But more importantly, sweetheart, Ellis continued, watch what happens now that your biological father realizes he can't use you as a weapon against me anymore. Mr. Baines, Judge Santos said, clearly struggling to follow the financial complexity, are you still seeking custody of this child? David looked at Kira, then at the camera broadcasting to millions of viewers, then at the documents that had just transferred ownership of a worthless company to him. For the first time since this began, he was in a position where his choice would reveal his true priorities. David hesitated, and in that hesitation, Kira saw something that made her small face scrunch with confusion. Daddy David, don't you want me anymore? The question hung in the air like an accusation. In front of millions of viewers, David Baines had to choose between admitting his manipulation or continuing a charade that no longer served his purposes. Of course I want you, sweetheart. But this situation has become complicated. What kind of complicated? Ellis knelt down to Kira's eye level, ignoring the cameras and the courtroom drama swirling around them. Kira, I want you to ask your biological father a question for me, okay? What question? Ask him if he would still want custody of you if it meant giving up all the money he just got from me. Kira turned to David with the direct innocence that only children possess. Daddy David, would you still want me if you had to give Daddy Ellis his money back? The silence that followed was deafening. David looked at his daughter, at the cameras, at the fortune he'd just acquired, and for the first time in years, he had no clever answer. That's not how these situations work, Kira. But would you? Sweetheart, you don't understand the adult complexities. I understand that Daddy Ellis gave you all his money to make me happy, and you won't give it back to make me happy. The 7-year-old's logic cut through 8 years of manipulation and legal strategy with devastating simplicity. Kira, David said desperately, I've spent 5 years planning to give you the life you deserve. What life do I deserve? She interrupted, her voice rising. Do I deserve a daddy who only wants me when it hurts other people? Do I deserve to never see mommy again? Do I deserve to move far away from everyone I love? You deserve better than people who lie to you. Everyone lied to me, Kira shouted, and suddenly she was crying with the heartbroken fury that only children can express. Mommy lied, Daddy Ellis lied, and you lied. But at least Daddy Ellis gave up everything to try to make me happy. What did you give up? The question echoed through the courtroom and across the live stream that had reached millions of viewers worldwide. David Baines, brilliant strategist, master manipulator, devoted father, had been undone by a 7-year-old who understood love better than he did. Your Honor, Ellis said quietly, I'd like to modify my statement. How so? I'm not giving up my parental rights. I'm exercising them. I'm protecting my daughter from being used as a weapon by someone who values revenge more than her happiness. Judge Santos looked at David Baines, who was staring at Kira as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Mr. Baines, given the unusual circumstances of this case, I'm going to ask you directly. Are you seeking custody of this child because you love her, or because you want to hurt Mr. Cross? The question hung in the air like a sword. David looked at his daughter, who was watching him with eyes that demanded honesty. He started, then stopped. 4 or 5 years in prison, he'd convinced himself that taking Kira was about love, about justice, about reclaiming what was rightfully his. But faced with her direct gaze and the weight of millions watching, he couldn't lie anymore. I wanted to hurt him, David whispered. I wanted to take away the thing he loved most because he took away everything I'd worked for. And now? Judge Santos pressed. David looked at Kira's tear-streaked face, seeing not a weapon but a little girl who'd been traumatized by the war between the adults in her life. Now I realize that trying to steal someone's love just destroys it, he said, his voice breaking. I've spent so much time planning revenge that I forgot how to be a father. Kira walked toward David, her small hand reaching out to touch his face. Daddy David, do you really love me? Yes, he whispered. But I love my anger more, and that's not fair to you. Does that mean you'll let me go home? David looked across the courtroom at Ellis, seeing not his enemy but a man who had been willing to sacrifice everything to protect a child's happiness. "It means," David said slowly, "that I'm going to do what your real daddy just taught me. I'm going to love you enough to let you choose your own family." He knelt down to Kira's level, taking her small hands in his. "Sweetheart, I'm your biological father, and I will always love you. But Ellis Cross has been your daddy in every way that matters. If you want to stay with him and your mommy, I won't fight it anymore." "Really? Really? And maybe someday, when you're older, if you want to know more about your biological father, I'll be here. But I won't try to steal you away from the people who've loved you every day of your life." Kara turned to look at Ellis, who was watching the exchange with tears streaming down his face. "Daddy Ellis, can we go home now?" "Yes, sweetheart. We can go home." As father and daughter embraced in the middle of a courtroom, witnessed by millions of viewers around the world, Judge Santos made her ruling. Custody awarded to Ellis Cross. Case dismissed. But the real victory wasn't legal. It was the moment when love proved stronger than manipulation, when sacrifice revealed the difference between wanting someone and loving them, and when a 7-year-old girl learned that family isn't defined by biology but by the people who choose to love you unconditionally. The man who had been told he wasn't a real father had just proven that love, not genetics, makes a family. And sometimes, the greatest victory is teaching your enemies the difference between winning and healing. 2 years later, Kara stood in the kitchen of their new house, carefully arranging pancakes on 3 plates while humming a song she'd learned in school. The morning sunlight streamed through windows that faced a garden instead of a concrete courtyard, and the sound of her parents talking quietly in the next room filled the space with the kind of peaceful domesticity that had once seemed impossible. "Breakfast is ready," she called, her voice carrying the confident joy of a 9-year-old who no longer flinched when adults raised their voices or worried that happiness was temporary. Ellis appeared first, his hair tousled from sleep and his face carrying the relaxed expression of a man who had learned to value presence over productivity. Behind him came Lena, wearing scrubs from her new job at the community clinic, work that felt meaningful after years of survival jobs that had only paid bills. "These look perfect, sweetheart," Ellis said, kissing the top of Kira's head as he sat down. "I made the smiley faces extra happy today because it's visiting day," Kira announced, cutting into her pancakes with the serious concentration she brought to everything important. Visiting day. Once a month, David Baines came to their house for dinner and an afternoon with Kira. It had taken 6 months of family therapy and careful boundaries, but they'd found a way to honor her biological connection to him without disrupting the stability she'd rebuilt with Ellis and Lena. "Are you looking forward to seeing him?" Lena asked, though she already knew the answer. Kira had worked through most of her confusion about the complicated adult relationships in her life, understanding now that David loved her but had made terrible choices in trying to express that love. "I want to show him my science project," Kira said. "I won the school competition." "That's wonderful, baby. What was your project about?" "How families work in nature. Like how some bird babies get raised by parents who aren't their biological ones, but they still learn to fly and be happy." Ellis and Lena exchanged a look over their daughter's head, the kind of silent communication that had developed between them as they'd worked to rebuild trust and partnership in the aftermath of crisis. It hadn't been easy. The revelations about their past had shattered assumptions and forced them to rebuild their relationship from scratch. Lena had spent months in therapy dealing with the guilt of her original manipulation and the subsequent years of accepting money from David. Ellis had confronted his own patterns of control and emotional distance that had made their marriage vulnerable to outside manipulation in the first place. But crisis had also burned away the superficial layers of their relationship, leaving them with a foundation built on truth rather than convenience. They'd learned to love each other as they actually were, not as they'd once hoped the other might become. "Speaking of families," Ellis said, pulling out an envelope that had arrived in the morning mail, "we got an invitation." "What kind of invitation?" Kira asked. "Remember Leila Rodriguez, the lady from the European Union who helped us during the scary time?" Kira nodded. Leila had been one of several adults who'd testified about David's manipulation during the custody proceedings, helping to establish the pattern of behavior that had convinced the court to award custody to Ellis. "She's getting married, and she wants us to come to the wedding. In Europe. In Spain. She says she wants to thank us in person for helping her realize that sometimes the best way to protect someone is to tell the truth, even when it's complicated." Leila's path to healing had been different from theirs. After the court case, She'd resigned from her position at the EU and started a non-profit organization that helped families navigate custody disputes involving international financial crimes. Her experience with David's conspiracy had taught her that justice wasn't just about prosecuting criminals. It was about protecting the innocent people caught in the crossfire. "Can we go?" Kara asked excitedly. "We'll see," Lena said, though her smile suggested the answer would be yes. Travel had become possible again because the financial settlement from David's surrender of the company assets had provided them with stability. Not wealth. Ellis had deliberately structured the rebuilt business to focus on sustainable growth rather than maximum profit, but genuine security. The doorbell rang, and Kara jumped up to answer it. Through the window, they could see David Baines standing on their front porch, holding a wrapped gift and looking nervous in the way he always did before these visits. "Hi, Daddy David," Kara said, opening the door with the casual warmth she'd learned to feel for him. "Hi, sweetheart. How's my brilliant daughter today?" "Good. Want to see my science project?" "I'd love to." David entered their home with the careful respect of someone who understood he was a guest in someone else's life. The past 2 years had changed him dramatically. Therapy, community service, and the daily work of learning to be a father without being controlling had softened the hard edges that prison had carved into his personality. "Ellis, Lena." He nodded to the other adults as Kara dragged him toward her bedroom to see the award-winning project. "Coffee," Lena offered, maintaining the polite friendliness that had replaced the fear and anger of their early interactions. "That would be great, thank you." As Kara chatted excitedly about bird families and adaptive behaviors, the 3 adults found themselves in the kitchen where so much of their family's daily life happened. "She looks happy," David observed, watching his daughter through the doorway. "She is happy," Ellis confirmed. "Most of the time. She still has nightmares occasionally, and she gets anxious when adults argue, but she's resilient." "Kids usually are, when they feel safe," David said quietly. "I'm glad she feels safe here." It was the kind of conversation that would have been impossible 2 years ago, honest acknowledgement of damage done and healing achieved. David had spent months in therapy dealing with his own trauma from prison and the obsessive planning that had consumed his life. He'd learned to separate his legitimate hurt over the business betrayal from his destructive need for revenge. "David," Lena said carefully, "there's something we wanted to discuss with you." "What's that?" Kira's been asking questions about having siblings. About what it would be like to be a big sister. David's face went through several expressions before settling on genuine happiness. "Are you?" "We're thinking about it," Ellis said. "But we wanted to talk to you first, to make sure you'd be comfortable with that dynamic. Comfortable with Kira having a sibling who would be biologically yours. Comfortable with being part of an extended family that might get more complicated." David was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. 2 years ago, the idea of Ellis and Lena having another child would have triggered jealousy and possessiveness. Now, after extensive therapy and the daily practice of putting Kira's needs ahead of his own, he found himself genuinely happy at the prospect. "I think Kira would be an amazing big sister," he said. "And I think having a sibling might help her feel even more secure about her place in your family." "Really? Really? The thing I've learned in therapy is that love isn't finite. Kara loving a sibling doesn't mean she'd love me less. And her being part of a bigger family doesn't diminish our relationship, it enriches it." From the other room, Kara's voice called out, "Daddy David, come see the part about how parent birds teach baby birds to fly." As David headed toward her bedroom, Lena caught Ellis's hand. "Are we really doing this?" she asked. "Another baby? Are you ready for another chance to do it right from the beginning?" "With you, I'm ready for anything." They followed David into Kira's room, where she was explaining her project with the kind of passionate expertise that suggested a future in science. "And the most important thing I learned," she was saying, "is that families work best when everyone chooses to love each other, not when they are forced to." "That's very wise," David said. "Where did you learn that?" "From watching you and Daddy Ellis and Mommy learn to be friends instead of being mad at each other." "And what else did you learn?" Kira looked thoughtful, her expression carrying wisdom that seemed far beyond her 9 years. "I learned that sometimes bad things happen to families, but if everyone works really hard to tell the truth and be kind, the family can become even stronger than it was before." David looked at Ellis and Lena, seeing his own realization reflected in their faces. What had started as a story of manipulation and revenge had become something none of them could have planned, a redefined family built on choice rather than biology, honesty rather than convenience, and love that had been tested and proven stronger than the forces trying to destroy it. Kara, David said gently, there's something I want to tell you. What? I want to thank you for teaching me how to be a better father. I taught you. You taught me that being a father isn't about owning someone or controlling their life. It's about loving them enough to want what makes them happy, even when it's not what you planned. Kira hugged him with the unself-conscious affection of a child who had learned that love and security could coexist with complexity. I love you, Daddy David. I love you too, sweetheart. And I love Daddy Ellis and Mommy. I know you do. And that's exactly how it should be. As evening approached and David prepared to leave, the family gathered on their front porch, the same type of porch where this story had begun with a frightened child begging not to be hurt. Next month, David said as he hugged Kira goodbye, I have something special planned for our visit. What kind of special? It's a surprise. But I think you'll like it. After he left, Kara settled between Ellis and Lena on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint their neighborhood in golden light. Mommy, Daddy, she said sleepily, are you going to have another baby? Ellis and Lena looked at each other in surprise. What makes you ask that? I heard you talking in the kitchen, and I think it would be fun to have a little brother or sister. Would you be okay with that? Lena asked. With sharing us with another baby. Kara considered this seriously. I think I have enough love for everyone. And maybe having a little brother or sister would help me understand even better how families work. How do families work? Ellis asked, curious about her perspective. Families work when everyone chooses to love each other every day, even when it's hard. Even when people make mistakes. Even when things get scary or confusing. She looked up at him with eyes that held the wisdom of a child who had survived adult chaos and emerged with her capacity for love intact. And families work best when everyone tells the truth, even when the truth is complicated. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ellis reflected on how much had changed since that terrible night when his daughter had begged a violent man not to hurt them. The little girl who had once been a victim of adult manipulation had become the teacher who showed them all how to heal. Kara, he said quietly, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to help families who are broken learn how to love each other again, she said without hesitation. Like we did. That's a beautiful dream, sweetheart. It's not just a dream, Daddy. It's a plan. And as they sat together on their porch, watching the neighborhood settle into peaceful evening routines, all three of them knew she was right. The family that had been shattered by lies and manipulation had been rebuilt stronger, wiser, and more loving than before. The little girl who had once sobbed, "Don't harm us," was now planning to spend her life helping other families find their way back to safety and love. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against those who try to destroy families is showing them what a real family looks like, built on choice, strengthened by truth, and held together by love that refuses to be conquered. What did this story teach you about the true meaning of family and the power of choosing love over revenge? How do you think Kira's journey from victim to healer reflects the resilience of children who survive adult conflicts? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.